Hello, friends and neighbors, and welcome to the latest edition of the Gifts for Glory podcast. I'm Dave Ebert, and really happy that you chose to spend some time with us today. We have a really great conversation with Patrick Lewis. He's a minister. He works at the Martinsburg Rescue Mission. Every day he's ministering and speaking to and counseling men and women who come through those doors. He's also the host of A Guy and His Bible podcast, which is a really great deep dive into the Word each week. He's also changing it up. We'll talk a little bit about his podcast coming up. And we also talk in this podcast, in our episode here, about Patrick's prodigal journey, his battles with depression and even suicidal thoughts, and how God is now using him in his current work. So I think you're going to take a lot out of this interview that we have with Patrick. But first, I do want to jump into our Devotions with Dave segment. And I want to dive into this passage from Matthew, chapter 25, verses 34 to 40. And I think that in this time, this divisive climate, politically, culturally, societally, all these things are pulling us apart, even within the church. And I think that while this necessarily doesn't speak to specific issues, it's an admonishment from Christ, and it's a teaching from Christ that if we get back to it, maybe if we as the church would get back to this and all the teachings of Jesus, we're going to see revival, we're going to see healing, we're going to see restoration of relationships, and we're going to be able to talk to each other and with each other and not at each other. So we're going to read Matthew 25, 34 to 40. Verse 34 starts, "Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me.' Then those righteous ones will reply, 'Lord, when did we ever see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink, or a stranger and show you hospitality, or naked and give you clothing? When did we ever see you sick or in a prison and visit you?' And the king will say, 'I tell you the truth. When you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you are doing it to me.'" A lot of meat there, and one of the things that's always stuck out to me about this passage is the term "least of these." Now, I believe Jesus is talking to us in a language that we'll understand, not language he intended. I say that because I don't believe he considers widows and orphans, the impoverished, the suffering as the least, because he also teaches us that those who are the least here in this life will also be the greatest in heaven. So to me, this feels as though he's reaching down to our level so we can get it, we can comprehend it. Now, we should love willingly, and it's not up to the government to take from citizens and give to the poor. This is what the church is supposed to be for. This is what we're tasked with. Now, I'm not getting political, but what I am saying is that sometimes you'll see people cite Jesus as the inspiration or the reason behind a certain political or economic ideology. And I think that far too often, Jesus is brought into that discussion in that way, and it's done out of ignorance or dishonesty. I'm not saying it always is. I am just saying that we should very, very carefully bring Jesus in when we are talking about who we're voting for, why we're voting for. We should seek Jesus and seek God's wisdom in those things, but we should not box Jesus into a political ideology. I think that that's very dangerous and can cause more division than it can help. So I just encourage you to be very careful with that. But the root of it is, we as the body of Christ should take care of people. We as the body of Christ should be out there loving and caring and providing and meeting needs for people that need it. And we shouldn't rely on a government agency to do it. That's what we're supposed to be about. Now, if we, the church, truly pursued all avenues to help and lift up those that we consider the least, and did so in love and compassion and with the servant's heart of Jesus, this world would be exponentially better. Now, another passage talks about entertaining angels unaware. Now, that is a blessing, and that's an amazing testimony if you hear the Spirit's leading and you find that you've entertained an angel. But that should not be your motivation, that that high moment of entertaining an angel, like, oh wow, that really happened. Your heart should be the desire to love people so that they can not help but see Jesus in you. Be the gate which Jesus enters the room that you're in. Serve, love, care. Do it with wisdom, but do it with reckless love. The song Reckless Love is huge. So many churches are singing it. But it's singing about the reckless love from God down. I would argue that that song is incomplete because we need to have that same reckless love back up. And also that same reckless love left and right. We, in our love relationship with God and His creation, His people, it should be in the shape of a cross, up and down, a two-way road, and then left and right, a two-way road. We should love one another with the reckless love that God has. And here Jesus says, when you do it to the least of these, when you do it to the people that you think maybe are underneath you, you're doing it to Him. So let's treat everyone like this, with that love and that compassion, and err on the side of compassion, err on the side of love. And I think that you'll see an improvement. So that was our Devotion with Dave segment. Really, it's a powerful instruction, a powerful testimony from Jesus about when you do it to the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you're doing it to me. If we remember that each and every time that we think, oh, this homeless person, I don't want to help them. When you think that, you're like, I don't want to help Jesus. So just be careful, be wise, but love the way Jesus loved us. Matthew 25:34-40. All right, so let's get to our interview. We talk with Patrick Lewis. He is involved in a rescue mission in Martinsburg, West Virginia. We talk about that. We talk about his podcast. And I really think that you're going to be touched by his Prodigal journey as the son of a pastor who is now working in ministry. I think you're really going to get a lot out of it. So here's Patrick Lewis here on the Gifts for Glory podcast, where we celebrate and promote men and women using their gifts for God's glory. We are now joined from Martinsburg, West Virginia by Patrick Lewis. He is a fellow podcast host. You can find him at aguyinhisbible.com, aguyinhisbible.com. In his spare time, Patrick is working on getting his associate's degree in biblical studies. He is he served as the mission supervisor for his local rescue mission. He's been a deacon at his home church and is on the audiovisual production team. Patrick Lewis, welcome to the Gifts for Glory podcast. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me, and it's an honor to be able to come on and sit down for a few minutes and talk to you.
I'm really excited to connect with somebody from the East Coast, back where I grew up. I was born in Chicago, but grew up in Southern Virginia, Southern West Virginia, and so it's kind of cool to reconnect to that region. Because you're in Martinsburg, which usually when it comes to state championship time in football, you guys in Bluefield are usually regulars battling each other. So it's really cool to reconnect with my East Coast.
Yeah, our local high school is actually the current owner of, I think it's the third longest winning streak in the country. I think it's either second or third. I can't remember which one. They've won 58 straight games, 4 straight titles, 7 of the last 10. So you're right. That's kind of, in a nutshell, there's actually a whole documentary on YouTube about the team and the how the team deals with one of the major problems in the area, which we talked about before we came on the show, which is the opioid epidemic. And the documentary is really cool of how the high school players and stuff deal with that. So, but you're right. I mean, we're known for drugs and football, not exactly what you want to be known for, but that's what it boils down to. So
how are things looking in West Virginia? Are they going to do football this year? What's going to happen out there?
Right now, they're still moving full steam ahead. Every time our governor does a daily briefing, so it's a very fluid situation. But our governor is actually the basketball coach of the girls' basketball coach at Greenbrier, one of the Greenbriers. It's either East or West. I can't remember which one. And so he is big into making sure the sports go on. And every indication seems to be that we are going to continue to play. I was actually talking to my dad about this, this weekend. I'm like, high school football to all of them is the one you got to have the fans in the stands for.
Right.
And I don't know how you're going to play high school football in an empty stadium. I don't see how that's going to work or how that atmosphere will ever be there. So.
I played at a single-A school in Virginia, so I kind of know what it feels like to be in an empty stadium.
Yeah, okay, yep.
You are a podcast host, you're in ministry and different things, so tell us a little about your podcast, how it got started, and what your vision is for A Guy in His Bible.
Sure. It got started a little over a year ago. I think May of last year was the first episode that I put up. And I had done podcasting before, not in the Christian realm. My best friend and I had gone on and off of different variety of shows. And then I had hosted a variety of music-based shows because that's kind of where my background is in music production and not music production, but event production, putting on concerts, things like that. So I had a couple that I don't even think you can find online anymore. At least I hope you can, because they were so bad. But then I thought, you know what, I have a talent for doing it. God has given me a talent to do this. My background is actually as a wedding DJ as well. I had done that for 20 plus years. So I knew how to operate the equipment and how to do the speaking and all that stuff. And I said, there's people all over the world hurting. There's people all over the world that you can reach. Even if you just reach one person, that's worth putting the time in to do it once a week. So I actually was lucky enough at the rescue mission where I am. We have a podcast studio, a live stream studio. We do shows for the mission here. So that's how I started, was using that studio, then transitioned into getting my own stuff eventually. But that's what it kind of came out of, was I know I have this talent to be able to do something for the kingdom. And why am I sitting around not using it? And the show has kind of transitioned into a lot of discipleship. That is kind of what the theme that I always go for. I always end the show with, remember when you go to church this week, step out of the church into your community. That's the big thing for me, is go to the church to learn about God, step out into your church and step out of your community to actually do the things that you learn in church.
And with your podcast, is it primarily you? Do you have guests, or what's the format like?
For the first year, well, up till last week, it was just me. It's just me. And what I'll do is I keep a journal. And I, as I'm doing daily readings and daily devotions and stuff, I'll just make notes down in that, and then just kind of structure something. Hey, this really struck me, and I want to kind of build a show around this type thing. And then last week I started doing interviews, so it's actually kind of a 2-part show. It's actually released on 2 separate days. On Wednesdays is the solo me show, and then on Fridays I release the interviews. And the interviews we've done so far have been around, last week I interviewed a pastor out of Pennsylvania and how he got through the COVID and how he transitioned that way and into where he is now. And then this Friday, I don't know when this is, but the next interview is one of my friends who actually owns a music production company, a live music production company. And I talk about how that industry is hit with the COVID situation. But the interesting about the one that's going to go up this week with that guy is he was also my roommate for a while, and he talks about what it was like living with me through when I was going through what I was going through, which we'll get to in my testimony. But he talks about how it was being on the front lines right there as he was watching me fall further and further and further down into where I was. So.
Well, and you're also a supervisor at the local rescue mission, where you said you kind of got your start with the podcast. What is the rescue mission? Is it for homeless? Who's it serve, and what's the mission of the rescue mission?
Well, I mean, our mission and our entire the mission statement that we have is Matthew 28:19 and 20. It's the Great Commission. I mean, that is what our entire model is based off of, is creating disciples. Every single person that walks through our door that's where our goal is to create a disciple for Christ. Now, we do that through the programs that we have. Yes, we do house the homeless. We feed 3 meals every day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It does not matter what the weather's like, what the situation is, any of that. None of that matters. So we feed that as well. We also have discipleship classes. We have chapel twice a day. We drug test and breathalyze everyone that comes in through the building to stay. And if they are unable to pass those, we don't make them not stay. We then shift them into recovery groups. We use Reformers Unanimous and Celebrate Recovery as our base structure recovery groups. So it's a full, well-rounded program. We actually have 5 values that we live by here at the mission. We are Christ-centered. We are one of our values is Christ-centered, stewardship, excellence. And I knew I was going to forget the other 2. No, Christ-centered, stewardship, excellence. But they're all built around that same idea. They're all built around uplifting and making sure everything we do is for the kingdom.
Absolutely. That sounds amazing. So you kind of touched on just a second ago. Let's dive into what makes you who you are now. Let's talk about your testimony. I know that in your bio you said that you're the son of a preacher. But it wasn't an easy trip for you. Kind of became a prodigal, it looks like. So tell us about your journey.
Sure. My dad is a pastor. He runs 2 churches right actually here in the town that I live in. Well, a little outside of the town that I live in. And I grew up in church. I mean, and it's the typical, I grew up in church. You hear people say that a lot, but that doesn't mean anything stuck. And so often you hear that, and even today, I that's one of the jokes is, God doesn't have grandchildren. And that's one of the things I always like to say to people, when I talk to people, it's, my family's religious, so my family's a Christians. And I'm like, well, that doesn't help you at all, to be honest with you. So, and one of the things as I was growing up, in probably around middle school, is when I really, that's as far back as I can remember, because Facebook has done a lot to help me understand what my past was like. Because one of the biggest things you do on Facebook is connect with old high school buddies, right? That's what it is. I'll get these friends requests, and I'll get from people, and I'm like, well, I kind of remember this name, and you'll see posts about people talking about, oh, remember when this happened and this happened and this happened, and I'm like, not really, I don't remember this. And the reason is it wasn't just because I wasn't that active in high school. I played football, I played basketball, I was in the theater club, all of those kind of things, and I was a decent student, I guess you could say. But since about probably 7th grade, I think, is when I really started, when I go back and think about it, that's when I really started noticing it. I started suffering from depression. And it was not just I don't feel that good, not a Eeyore, that's type depression, It was a crippling, I would wake up in the morning and be mad that I woke up, and then go to bed at night not wanting to wake up the next morning. And that would be my mindset throughout the entire day. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So from when I was in high school, from middle school, high school, on through college, on through my 20s, 30s, that's what I was. That was my life. Now, I had jobs, like I said, I was a wedding DJ. I had other jobs here and there, that type of thing. I got married, then divorced. There was a child that came out of that marriage, which, I'll admit I abandoned. It's not something I'm proud of, but it was one of those situations, and the easiest way to describe it is I didn't care. And it wasn't oh, man, I just don't care if that person, it was just, I lost my job. Oh, well. Oh, my wife was divorced. Oh, well. It was that kind of, it was just a complete, just didn't really care about anything. The mid-20s is when my first suicide attempt happened. The only place that I had any kind of, that I was happy at all, I guess you could say, was a beach area. And living on the East Coast, you have a variety of choices for that. So I hitchhiked down to one of the beaches that's near us. I would not recommend doing that today because it's definitely a different era. This was back in the early 90s, definitely a different era now. And it took a whole bunch of sleeping pills while I was in the hotel room and just woke up not feeling well. Apparently I either didn't take enough or, it wasn't that. It was God had other plans.
Right.
That's how I like to put it, looking back on it. So I came back home, lived with the parents for a little bit, then, started right back down the spiral again. I was DJing at the time, and this would take us up to about mid 2011 to 12. And that's when I lost the one job that I had and moved in with the guy that you hear the interview with. That was about the time I moved in the guy that you hear the interview with. And I had a best friend who I had gone through college with. He was the best man at my wedding. I was in his wedding. Everybody was, we were just best friends. The guy I've been doing the podcast with back in the early 2000s or mid 2000s. And he was part of the company that I was involved with, that was my wedding company. And the guy that I moved in with was like, hey, I'd like to come in on this too, but I don't want this guy in the company if I come in. And I'm like, okay, no problem. And just fired him right there. Just said, go away. I don't want to deal with you anymore. And this is somebody I've known for 30 years almost.
Right.
That was, and I say that because that's the mindset that I had. I just didn't care from day to day what happened. When I would work, I'd go to work and be the life of the party. You can't be a successful wedding DJ and be Eeyore. It doesn't work that way. You have to be. And then I would come home and just lock myself in my room and not come out for 4 days. Around Labor Day weekend of 2013, we had 2 weddings. I had had enough. I was just done. The roommate and I were fighting all the time about all kinds of things, and I just had it. So hopped in the company car, drove to the beach, and it was about 2 a.m, and I'm standing on a ledge of a penthouse suite, looking straight down, and I can still remember the sound of the ocean, still remember what it smelled like, still remember exactly that's where I'm going to land, that's where it's going to end as I'm looking down, right? And the one thing about depressives, and when I talk about depression with people, and I'm not the type of person that sugarcoats something. Depression is a very selfish disease, and that's what I classify it as a disease. And it's a very selfish disease in that you could care less what anyone else around you, what the effect of what you're doing has on anyone else around you. It didn't matter. The whole time I was going through this, I never reached out for help, and I just didn't care. But as I was standing on that ledge, the one thing that popped into my mind for the first time ever was what I was about to do, the effect it would have on somebody else, the effect it would have on my parents, the effect it would have on the people who knew me, stuff like that. And then once again, I'm convinced that was God opening that part of my mind just enough to get me off that ledge. That was God saying, I'm not done with you yet. But I wasn't saved yet.
Right.
I still wasn't saved. So I come out off the ledge, start driving home, and this is where the legal aspect of it gets involved. Because although it was the vehicle we used for the company, it was actually not registered in the company name. It was registered in my roommate's name. And as I'm coming home, woo, woo, woo. And of course I get stopped for taking the vehicle because he had reported it stolen when he woke up the next morning and saw it wasn't there and everything, So I did 4 months in jail. And the first night I was in jail, I told the straight trooper everything. Hey, look, this is what's going on. This is what's happening. So they put me on suicide watch because I still wasn't. I was still gone. My mind was still completely gone. And the officer could tell, and he knew it. And on suicide watch, I never want anyone to have to experience what that is. You're in a room, at least the jail I was in, and I think most of them are like this as well. You're in a room that's windows all around it. Everyone can see inside of it. And you're basically giving a U-Haul blanket with a Velcro is essentially what they give you because they don't want you to harm yourself. They don't want to give you anything you can harm yourself with. And it was in there, I was done because, I knew whatever the outcome of the jail was, whatever it was. I was facing 10 years, but we knew it wasn't going to get to that, but that's what I was facing. And I knew I was going to try it again, right? I mean, I knew just because I came off the ledge, just because the sleeping pills didn't work earlier, I knew there would be another attempt again. I just knew there would be. So that's when I just got down on my knees and went, God, if you're out there, and isn't that how we always start the prayer, right? Isn't that how it's always started? God, if you're out there, God, and I knew he was out there because I'd gone through, 10 years of Sunday school. I knew. I said, God, if you're out there, I said, I'm done. I have nothing left. I know I'm going to attempt this again once I get out of jail. I know it's going to happen again if you're out there. And the next day is when I met with a psychiatrist for the first time. I had never met with one my entire life. And that's when it was explained to me that what was going on, yes, I was responsible for it. And I never, ever, ever act like that wasn't the case. But she explained medically what was going on. She explained, hey, this is a chemical thing in your brain. This is something that there's an imbalance, and that's what's causing you to do this. And she put me on medication. And you hear, I don't want to be on medication. It makes me feel this way. One of the things that I now advocate for a lot is, in particularly in Christian circles, knock off the you just have to pray more. Knock off the you just have to have more faith. Your mind will be fine if you just connect more with God. Whenever anybody tells me that, I'll look at them and I'll go, do you have a child? And most of the time they'll say, well, yeah. I said, okay, well, the next time your child's out playing football or basketball or soccer or whatever it is, and they fall down and they break their arm, I don't want you taking them to the hospital. I just want you standing over top of them and pray. And if you're right, if you have enough faith then God's going to heal the bone without you having to take them to the hospital.
Right.
Because that's what the medication is. The medication is the cast for your brain.
Right.
That's what it's for. And I had never understood that until I was in jail and was able to sit down with that psychiatrist and have it explained to me. And that's how I got saved. So that's kind of the testimony side of it. But the inaction side of it, I'm still facing who knows what and everything. And my dad comes to visit me, and my mom was still alive at this time. And I tell him everything that had happened. And with him being a pastor, he's happy, but he's still worried. And I say, well, one thing I remember whenever, and I used to hear it said all the time, when you get saved, go read the book of John. And I think that's what the standard line is. The first book you want to read is the book of John. I said, but you know me. I said, you know me better than anybody else. And my mom had written me this letter, and she said, I don't think that's a good place for you to start because you know the foundation. You know who Jesus is. You've gone through the Sunday schools, all that stuff. You know all that. She said, what I want you to do is I would suggest you start in what she calls the middle Pauline letters. Galatians, Ephesians, Colossians, Philippians, those 4 letters. She said, start them there. And she said, I think that's where you'll be able to glean a lot of stuff from. And as I'm reading through them in the jail cell, in the King James Bible, because that was all they had, and no comment on that. But anyway, that's not what I use on my show. I'll let people know that right now, because the these and thous just throw me off when I'm trying to read. But anyway,
that's the English that Jesus spoke.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, and it's got to be the 1611 one too. It can't be the other one than that. Anyway, but as I'm reading Philippians, I hit a verse, and it was like the light bulb went off. Then it was like this is wow. Now this is where it all starts to make sense. And it was Philippians 4:8. Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are that verse where it says, put into your mind those things of God and stop putting into your mind those things that aren't of God. I mean, that's the Patrick translation of it, but that's essentially what it is. And I got to thinking, man, all I did when I wasn't working was I would just sit in my room and watch How to Kill People TV shows, CSI and Criminal Minds and all that stuff. And the music I was listening to, I didn't listen to Death Metal or anything like that, but it wasn't uplifting music, right? The books I was reading, I was big into serial killer books and all that kind of stuff. And all those things, as you're pouring it into your mind, they're going to start to have an effect on you.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really become my life verse, I guess you could say, is I always be careful of what I put into my mind, what I take in. Now, yes, I'll go see a movie every now and then or something like that, but I'm always very careful of balancing it out with doing something godly, making sure that the balance stays there. So I get out of jail, and I get out of jail on January 4th, 2014, and my dad picks me up from the jail and says, you can't come home, because my mom's very sick at this time. My dad's her primary caregiver. He's running 2 churches, and he's like, I just can't have you back home. So he brings me to the rescue mission. And I'm like, okay, I mean, this is it. It's January in West Virginia. We're not talking Bahamas here, you know. It's
right.
And that's how I came here. And so I worked my way through the program here, and eventually in 2017 got hired on as staff. And I'm a live-in supervisor, so I still live here at the mission. So there's those 2:00 in the morning knock on my doors of, hey, we got to come down and get this done. But that's my story. That's in a not so short version. That's my story. So
I think it's awesome, and I'm sure that you picked up on it. Is you said that the verse that really kind of flipped the switch for you is in Philippians, a book you read in jail that was written by Paul in jail.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
I love the parallel nature of how something that's 2,000 years old is still relevant and still working today.
Yeah, and I love those middle letters. I mean, Paul. I mentioned it. I had the opportunity to give the message at my home church this past Sunday morning, and I said, my favorite person in the Bible outside of Jesus, because you always have to say that because people look at you weird if you don't add that part to it, is Paul. Just his story in those middle letters. Romans is, I think everyone can agree, is a little bit heavy, but those middle letters, I think you can glean so much out of Christian living out of in such a short amount of reading that you can do there.
Yeah, absolutely. So you end up at the rescue mission as a client, then now you're working as a supervisor. Yeah. What do you do there as far as being a supervisor? Is it kind of like a residence assistant, like at a college dorm, or what else are you doing there?
I think the best way to describe it, even though it's not in the description, it's a case manager. I deal with the men that come through our doors one-on-one on a daily basis. We right now we fluctuate between 42 and 47 full-time residents, wow, and then normally about 7 to 10 guests each night. And my job essentially is to, make sure they're working, because we're a working rescue mission. So everyone that stays in our residency program is assigned a job duty every day. Everything is done by the men here. All the cleaning, our kitchen, all the meals we serve. We have a full recycling center, warehouse, a thrift store. All of that is run by the men, and I oversee that operation. Plus making sure that they're on the right track spiritually. At least a couple times a week, we'll sit down with the guys, do you have any questions in your Bible reading and those kind of things, and help them with that. And then my door is always open for questions. I fill in the chapel services when a church doesn't show up. Like last night I had to fill in. And that's one great thing about doing the podcast is I always have backup chapel messages, right? Because I can just take one of the messages from the podcast and do it. That's exactly what I did last night, actually. So that's kind of that's what my duties are here. Is just, I think a case manager is the best way to describe it. Get them in connection. A lot of the guys that come in here don't have IDs. That's one of those things where no birth certificates, no social security cards, no state IDs, things like that. Helping them walk through that process of getting those things, which nowadays is becoming more and more difficult as they keep on changing the restrictions on everything. Sure. So that's kind of what I do now.
And while there, have you seen a lot of trouble with people that are coming in and causing trouble, or does everyone understand that you're there to help and they're really receptive to you?
Well, that's a funny kind of a two-edged sword question, and the reason I bring that up is when I first got here, the leadership was completely different than what it is today.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first got here, and we make light of this to illustrate the point, is the rescue mission when I came here was a place known that you could come get high and get drunk.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it was known as. It was, if you want to have a safe place to go get high and get to, that's where you go. And January of last year, so a year and 8 months-ish or so ago, we got a new superintendent that has started to turn that Titanic of a ship around. And now we're no longer seen as that in the community. We're seen as the place that if you want to get legitimate help, if you want to have your life turned around, this is the place to go. Like this year, we've already had 45 guys go through our employment program, which means they've come in through the program, gone and gotten jobs outside, and have now graduated and are living on their own with full-time employment outside. And a lot of them are connected back into the local churches as well, because that's one of the things we really do is stress finding a local home church. Just we're located right downtown, and within our walking distance, I can sit here and name 15 churches.
Wow. So,
and it's all denominations, all, there's I hate using this term, but there's the quote unquote black churches, so there's a mix of everything that they could possibly want, and we connect them with those pastors and with those leaders in those churches to get them involved in those churches too.
Has there been any, especially in the last year and a half or so since you really have seen this around, what victories have you seen? Is there any story that sticks out of something that you've just seen God do through somebody because they've been through the rescue mission?
Yeah, we had a guy here that was he just left back in March, I think is when he left. He came here, had a huge drinking problem. Thank God it wasn't drugs. His demon was drinking and women, because most of the guys that come in here, that's their number one problem. And he came in through the program. He had told me when he first got here, I've been in church most of my life. The same story almost like mine. I've went and everything like that. And one of the first things he says is, I want to get reconnected with God. He said, I don't like the life. He was finally admitting, I don't like the life I'm leading right now. So we got him into the recovery groups, got him into the programs. And what we try to do when we know someone's getting ready to leave, when we know someone's getting ready to graduate out of the program, we try to sit down and shoot a short video with them to use for our website and Facebook page and stuff like that. And during the video process, he's just going on about how much the mission's helped him and everything. And then he said, well, I'm moving, and he was moving down south. And he said, I'm moving down south, and one of the first things I want to do when I get down there is, I know there's not a place like this in the town that I'm going to, so I want to help start funding it.
Oh, wow.
Start one. And that's really, that was like, yes, that's what we want to do. We want those guys to leave our doors with that attitude of, I want to help now, as opposed to just take.
And it's literally the discipleship program. You discipled him, and you've seen God work in him. Now he's going to go and spread what you're doing and reach even more men. So it's that gospel model of going out with the Great Commission and baptizing people in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and going out and spreading it, because we just need to get out there, and more people need it. There in West Virginia, the opioid crisis. I left West Virginia, kind of in the midst of it. I was there until 2013, and that's when it was really starting to become noticed and make big news, is how many people that, because there's such a lack of jobs, the coal mining industry is so up and down, and there's not much other industry in the state. So people are trying to fill their time with something, and it turns out to be pills sometimes.
You're right. And for us up here, in that part of the state, in the southern part of the state, that's what you really see is the prescription pills. That's where the epidemic for them is. For us up here, it's heroin. That's what, we do have the oxy, abuse and things along those lines, but it's heroin for us. We are, if you walk around our town, and you see needles. You find needles in the side corners and stuff all over the place. And it's and the reason is because, and you kind of know where we're located. We're located right off the interstate, right off the highway, and we are, an hour from DC, an hour from Baltimore, 2 hours from Philadelphia, 3.5 hours from New York City, and you're right along the highway. You have all these little mom and pop hotels that the dealers can come in, set up for a week or so, boom, 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 and then they're off and they flood the town with it, and that's where our biggest issue. That is the biggest issue that we have here is the heroin epidemic, and along with the heroin epidemic, you see a rise in the abuse of things like Suboxone, which is the step down drug that basically I call it the legal heroin because that's essentially what it is. And then you see guys getting hooked on that, and instead of stepping down off of it, you see them being on it for 6-7 years.
It's such an epidemic, and West Virginia is ravaged by it, and it's chemical dependency is really an American problem, and yes. The more people that become aware of it to help fight against it, and to do what you're doing is offer a safe place to get off of that and find God and find something to fill that God-shaped hole that's not a chemical. So that's amazing. And I do want to go back to your testimony. You talked a little bit about depression. You and I have a very similar testimony. I used to work in radio, and I was also a pro wrestler in West Virginia for a time. And so performance, being in front of people, entertaining the life of the party was how I got value, but the rest of the time I was fighting depression and suicide that whole time until I finally let God get a hold of me. So it's just really cool to hear a similar testimony, and I've rediscovered a relationship with the Lord in early 2013. So similar time frames as well between the two of us. But you mentioned something that I think needs to be really pounded home, and that's that the church, even though it's getting better, still looks down on mental illness as something you just pray away or something you just wish away, or if you had more faith, you could just get rid of it. But it truly is, it's exactly the same thing as your example of, well, don't take your kid to the hospital. Just pray away the broken bone. Just if that kid gets a concussion in football, well, just pray it away. Don't get him looked at. Don't get him treated. If he had faith, his brain wouldn't be bruised. So I think that it's really important that the church realize that somebody that's suffering from real depression, where it's a chemical imbalance, they do have some power over their choices, but the forces that make them feel those choices needs to be treated. Otherwise, they're just as sick as somebody with cancer.
Yeah, and you're 100% right. And I think I was lucky enough at the time when I got here at the mission. One of the first things I did was go on Facebook, because isn't that where we find all of our answers? and I said, I'm looking for a church.
More of the Gifts for Glory podcast in just a second. I really enjoyed this interview and hope you're enjoying listening to this wonderful conversation. We'll return with the second half of our interview in just a moment. I just wanted to step in and share more about Well-Versed Comedy, the improv comedy ministry of Gifts for Glory. Well-Versed is a clean, family-friendly comedy troupe that performs super fun, always original comedy shows for all ages. We've packed the house at Second City on 2 occasions, headlined 2 nights in a row at Gutty's Comedy Club in suburban Indianapolis, plus offered our talents at numerous fundraisers throughout Chicagoland. In this crazy time, we've even taken our talents to create fun virtual shows, which are available for free on our Facebook page. And we'd love to be your solution for entertainment for your next event in the future, or for a special online gathering to bring together your family, friends, co-workers, or small group. If you're looking for something special, we'd love to help make your gathering one to remember, if for all the right reasons. So if we can help you out, please email improv@wellversedcomedy.com, improv@wellversedcomedy.com. And more of our interview next, right here on the Gifts for Glory podcast, where we celebrate and promote men and women using their gifts for God's glory.
I I was lucky enough at the time when I got here at the mission. One of the first things I did was go on Facebook, because isn't that where we find all of our answers? and I said, I'm looking for a church. I hadn't been in church. I hadn't been connected to a church since probably 1989, 1990-ish, around there. And I said, I'm looking for a church. And my dad, being a pastor, he gave me some recommendations in his denomination of, you might want to avoid this one or try this one out and stuff like that. So for about 8 weeks, I did what I called the church tour, which was 1 week go to a church and, that kind of thing. And when I ended up at the one I'm at now, a girl who had been a previous wedding client of ours that I had been very good friends with for a while had suggested, where I'm at now, my home church now. And she had said, well, come on out on a Wednesday night. And I'm like, no, the first time I go to a church is not going to be on a Wednesday night Bible study. That is not that. And she said, no, I'll be there. And I knew her family a little bit. And so, they'll be there. And so I show up and she's not there.
Oh, no.
So I'm just rolling my eyes going, oh, okay. So, but what was great about it was, as soon as I walked in, I had never met the pastor before, and he has since moved, semi-retired and moved on to another church. But I had never met him before, and as soon as I walked through the door, it's like I've been going there since I was a child. Mm-hmm. And that's the feeling that we should be giving as a church. Mm-hmm. We shouldn't be looking, because they had no idea who I was. They no clue. In me, anybody who knows me knows I don't dress up. like what you see in the video of me preaching this past week at church, that's the most dressed up you're ever going to see me, and it's jeans and a polo shirt. All right, that's the most you're ever going to see me. I'm a Crocs wearer, so you can insert whatever joke you want to in there. But that's what I think the church really needs to start realizing, is how you greet those people who are broken, who aren't part of your inner family. How you greet those people is truly what makes the difference in your community. Because, like I said, that was the last of the 8, probably I think 7 or 8 churches I had gone to, and that was the first time I had felt like that. So that tells you 7 other churches I went to, I left going, there's no way I'm going there, because it's a family, it's an inner circle, and I'll never be able to crack into that. Mm-hmm. And we have to get out of that model of, church is for the people that are already here, and you come in and you adopt what we want, and you dress like we want, and you use the same translation of the Bible that we use, and you fall in line with all this stuff, and then we'll start ministering to you. And boy, is that the wrong model to be using to reach the lost.
Exactly. And to some extent, I understand why some churches or some people in the church take that way. It's because there's that fear of wasting time or like pouring into somebody and have them reject you ultimately. Well, because when you're in a church for any period of time, you're going to get hurt either by a fellow Christian or a pastor. So sometimes that guard gets up and becomes a stone wall where nobody can get in until they've proven themselves worthy, and they're worthy of my discipleship.
Well, I took a break from my home church. You talked about sometimes you get hurt by a church and whatnot. I took a break from my home church, and actually the start of the podcast is what coincided with that break. If you go back and listen to my very first episode, I talk about this. I talk about why I stepped away from the church I belonged to. At that point in time, it was 4 years, and I resigned my deaconship and some other things I've been doing at the church because of some things that were going on in the church. And it probably wasn't until, I think it was from like May to October of last year, I didn't go to church at all. I would listen to people online. I would listen to podcasts, Stephen Furtick, Craig Rochelle, Stanley. Those are the type of guys I would listen to. I would watch their YouTube videos, but I didn't actually go into a church building. And it wasn't until a couple of the members from that church came and sat down and had dinner with me one night and was like, we need you to come back because we have some needs. We were getting a new pastor in and things like that, that I really realized how much I need to go back to get fed as well. Because as great as technology is and as great as sitting down and watching stuff on YouTube, you got to be in the building. You've got to be connected there with the people at least once a week. I mean, Acts tells us they met every day.
Right.
You know, and I laugh when I sit back. Okay, we have a problem getting somebody in a building for an hour on Sunday and maybe an hour on Wednesday, and they met every day. You know, I mean, if we're not following that biblical model, which is, I mean, I would love to meet every day, and we do here. I mean, we do because of my job. I do, but man, if you could find a church that, you know, is doing something every night of the week and opening it up every night of the week for the community of some type of different activity, that's the model. That's what we're supposed to be doing as a church.
Right. That's how you reach people, because not everybody, unfortunately, in our society can afford to take a Sunday off and have that days. There are people that have to work on Sundays, or they have to work Saturday night, and they're not able to come on a Sunday morning. So as open as a church can be, it needs to be, and allow the people to come in and get ministered to and contribute their gifts as well. Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, my work day is Sunday. I don't have off on Sunday. I get up, I go to church, I go to lunch with my dad, I come back, and I go to work. I don't have, so I'm in that group of, I don't have Sunday off. My days off are Tuesday and Wednesday. That's the days I have off during the week. So you're right. And there's some people that work factory work. There's some people that work shift work. There's some people that just can't do it. And the more options we give somebody to come to know Christ, no matter how it is, and if we're not using what we have available to us, we're failing in the Great Commission. That's how I look at it.
And I think that this year has been such a weird year. And for me, my heart has been, the church should never have closed. Precautions should have been taken. I agree with precautions and safety and wisdom, but whenever there's a crisis, the first place people want to go is a church building, to be with people, to hear good news. And it was so disheartening for the church to close, because like you said, technology is a wonderful thing, but it does not replace the gathering together. It does not replace the fellowship of being in the same building with people, singing the same songs, hearing the word of God. And I think that there's a lot of churches and a lot of pastors that have learned from this year that, you know, we're going to continue to be that light in a world of darkness. But, 2020 has just been a really weird year, and I hope that the church has learned from it.
Well, I actually, if you go listen to the interview that I did with the pastor in Pennsylvania, the whole interview was centered around that of not should the church have closed or not, but when they did close, what did they do? How did they come back? And they were a church like my home church is now, a church in transition. A church that is like, we're essentially rebranding our church right now. We're going, we're trying to decide what elements of the old and new and all that stuff. And that's what this pastor was doing as well. And he took the break because he's in Pennsylvania. They have very strict guidelines that their governor laid down up there. And he took the opportunity to renovate the church. Mm-hmm. He's like, I know. Okay, now we know. It was that funny thing, because as the church leaderships of all across the country were talking, it was that thing was, how long do we go before we shut down? Because we know once we shut down, that's it. Mm-hmm. It's not, we're going to shut down this week and we're going to come back next week. Once we shut down, you're going to be closed for a good 2.5, 3 months. And he pushed it as long as he could. Then, as soon as they shut down, he said, okay, now we're going to start doing renovations that we need to done. So when people walked back into that church 3 months later, it was a new church. It was everything was done. And I think that's what you saw a lot of churches do. Mm-hmm. It's particularly with the streaming side, because so many churches did not have streaming stuff. I know that because as we were trying to build the streaming here at the Rescue Mission up, we wanted to invest in some new equipment. And my boss told me, he said, okay, go ahead and order what you need. And I went to the site that I get all my stuff from, and my rep was like, yeah, that's going to be at least a month before we can get that for you. And I'm like, well, this is a pretty common item. He's like, yeah, but you got to remember, every church in the country is now streaming. Mm-hmm. Every church in the country is now setting up streaming stuff. And I was like, oh, that's a good point. So I think that is a good aspect of what you can take out of this. I agree with you. I don't think the church should have closed either. I didn't have a say in my home church's decision because I'm not on the leadership board anymore out there. But I think that it showed a sign of weakness to do it, unless you're in a state that is going to say, we're going to come and we're going to arrest you and we're going to put you in jail. I'd still have a hard time justifying closing, even if that was the case. I can understand a little bit better, but the one good thing I think that did come out of the COVID was churches are now better equipped to move forward in the future. You have a lot of these churches that had no online presence whatsoever that now suddenly have that extra component they can use to help people worship. My dad's church is one of them. Every Wednesday during COVID, when his church was shut down, I would go to his house and film his message for him because they didn't have a Facebook page. They had no way to stream anything. They had no YouTube page, nothing. So I would film it and then upload it and do all that for his church. And the people loved it because now at least they get some type of message there where that wasn't there before.
Wow. Absolutely. Now, this is a horrible transition, but you brought your dad into this again. Mm-hmm. With your testimony, you kind of doing the prodigal journey. How was your relationship with your dad through that? As him being a pastor, and I know that he had picked you up and said you can't live here because of mom's condition. How was your relationship through all that, and how is your relationship now with that?
My dad had always been the "how can we get you help" type guy. I'm going to answer the question. I'm going to answer it in a weird way. It's funny because looking back at what I went through now, and I talked to people that had been around me, my good friends and stuff like that, it was the same thing. Almost all of them say, we knew something was going on. In other words, you weren't that good of an actor.
Right.
That we knew something was going on, but none of us knew how to help you. And I think my dad fell into that category of, he knew something was going on. He would always be asking, man, what's going on? Are you okay? Are you okay? He even said he could tell the second time I slipped, and he's like, we knew something was coming. We just had no clue what to do. And I didn't hold anything against them when he said I couldn't go. I had totally understood the situation that was there. And now my relationship's better than it's ever been with them. We talk. My mom passed away in 2015. He's gotten remarried. A wonderful lady who's also runs 2 churches. So they run 4 churches between the 2 of them. That's a little insane, but and so we have lunch once a week or every Sunday after church. We'll go somewhere to eat. Our communication lines are open. We go on little road trips, little weekend trips out of town together, stuff like that. None of that stuff we had done before because I was completely and totally closed off. And it's been a joy because I know he's probably not going to be with us that much longer. He's 78 years old, I think, something like that. So, he's getting to that point in time where that's the thought that I have to think about. And what I talk about a lot is with my mom. That's the one that hurts a little more because I only had a year of being saved to talk with her about the Bible and things like that. And when I think back of all the missed opportunities I would have had during that time she was alive to be able to have biblical discussions with her, talk with her about Christ, because she was saved too. She was a very heavily involved in church as well. Those are opportunities I'll never get back. Those are chances I'll never be able to sit down and have again. And one of the things that I even mentioned it in the message I did at church this week, that I really, really am working on is trying to open up lines of communication with my brother, because he lives, 7 miles from me right now. And up until about 4 months ago, we hadn't talked to each other since my mom's funeral. It was one of those situations where we just and he is not saved. And that's the one. Real quick, the message I did this week, I called it. It was called "Getting Past Your Past," but the subtitle of it could have been "Who is Your Samaria?" Who are you going out of your way to not talk about God and Jesus with? Who are you purposely avoiding out of there? And I said, mine's my brother. Mine for years had been my brother. And I think getting saved helps refocus what is important to you. Right. Letting go of those things of the past. And with my dad, that was one of the things, because I had done some things to the family too during this time. When I was going through it, it wasn't just people outside of. I had done some things with the family too that they had to forgive me for. They had to help me, get past. Mm-hmm. And the same thing with my best friend, who was the only other person that came and saw me when I was in jail. The guy that we fired from the company, he came in, and I'm thinking, oh, here we go. Here comes the, I told you so, and type thing. And he had just got back and going into church as well, because he had been going through some things. And he's like, I'm here for you. I'm here, whatever you need. And it was stunning, because I had just gotten saved like 2 days earlier, and I'm not able to wrap my mind really around what's going on with it. And, we formed another company when I got out of jail and did it up till last year. We were doing wedding photography and video at that point. So we're no longer doing it anymore, but that's, that shows you the power that God can use to heal those wounds and heal those rifts if you'll just give them a chance to do it.
Absolutely. Two things that I do to end each show. The first thing is called the interrogation. I fire 7 quick random questions at you, just to kind of get to know you better on the way out.
Sure.
So first question is, favorite pro team?
New England Patriots.
Really? From West Virginia, you like the Patriots?
Yeah, it's funny because I'm not really from West Virginia. I was adopted. I was born in Alabama, adopted when at a young age, moved to Virginia. We were in Roanoke, Virginia for a while, moved to Wichita, Kansas, then moved here. So my geography is all over the place. So that is my favorite pro team, but I will caveat that by saying I don't watch a lot of sports anymore, and we'll just leave that there. We won't go into the reason why. We'll just leave that there. Yeah, it's the Patriots. I'm a diehard Patriots fan, even through the 1 in 15 years before they were actually good. I was a fan. So yeah.
Nice. You're stranded on the island, and you can take one book other than the Bible with you. What book would that be?
Manhunt: The 12-Day Chase for Lincoln's Killer. It's by a guy named James Swanson. I've probably read it about 5 times already. It is a fascinating look at the chase for John Wilkes Booth, told from the perspective of Pinkerton diary journals. And it's incredible. I'm a history buff. I'm a massive history. So I live in a very good area. This is a huge Civil War area and battlefields everywhere and stuff like that. And the first time I read it, I was just enthralled by it. And every year or so, I keep going back and reading it again.
You touched on it just a moment ago. You said that you kind of moved around, born in Alabama, Roanoke, Virginia, Wichita, Kansas. Of the places you've lived, which is your favorite and why?
Well, it would have to be here because I was very young when I was in Roanoke and Wichita. Wichita was fun. I will say that, but I have fond memories of Wichita. I played soccer for about 17 years, and there was an indoor soccer team, which was really cool out there, and there was a minor league hockey team when we were out there, and that was back in the early 80s, but it would be here. I mean, I have a great life here. It's been bumpy up till a few years ago. Hopefully it's a little bit more smooth out now. But I really like the town that I live in, even with the problems. It is the quintessential small town American hometown. And that's something that I know you live, in Chicago. And actually our police chief that just retired came from Chicago. So, I love big cities. I love going to D.C., Philly, places like that, but I like the small town atmosphere, so it'll probably be here.
Question number 4, what is your proudest moment or achievement?
Ooh, wow. I'd have to say, joining the church and getting baptized. I mean, that was a decision I didn't take lightly. I understood the importance of it, and I think sometimes we disregard the importance of it just for the show of it. Let's put it that way. You see these churches, and nothing wrong with this. You see these churches, setting up huge swimming pools out in their parking lot and doing mass baptisms and stuff like that. And I think that kind of devalues what it actually is, and I really, that is a day I'll remember in my church for the rest of my life. I know that.
With the format of A Guy and His Bible, basically you just kind of dive really deep into one verse at a time or one passage at a time. What has been your favorite verse to dive in for the podcast?
I really, and I'm not doing this just because it's the one that went up last week, but I really enjoyed doing the show I did last week, because I'm in the middle of a series called What's the Next Verse, and we're looking at how we sometimes take scripture out of context and things like that. And I looked at John 3:16 last week, and it was fun looking at what's around that verse. And I highly suggest people go back and look at from like John 3:9 to John 3:21, and really look and see how John 3:16 falls into that section and what's actually going on there. Because I actually used this as a trivia question for the guys at chapel last night. I said, who's Jesus actually saying this to? Because when you read it, you just assume he's talking to the apostles. He's not. He's talking to somebody completely else, and I discovered that as I was reading through. So that's probably so some of my other favorite, episodes of the show, or what did. I did when John Cooper from Skillet made his thing last year. I had a guest pastor, and I co-hosted the show for an episode talking about that, and that was a really fun show to do too. Because of my background in music, and music has always been a passion of mine. I can't sing, I can't play an instrument. You don't want to hear either one of those things, but I've always had a passion for music, so anything to do with music, so that was a fun show to do as well. Despite what the word might tell us, the Lord tells you that tomorrow is the rapture. What do you do with the next 24 hours? It's funny, because I did an interview last week for another podcast to somebody we know, and I'll give you the same answer that I did there. I would have, another meal with my dad, because those are so enjoyable with my dad and Lisa, and then I would spend the rest of the time with my brother, because there is so much lost time there. Years and years and years of lost time there that I would want to get as much in as I possibly could before to make one last push to help him understand the importance of, that final, where you're going to spend eternity. So looking forward to A Guy in His Bible podcast. Is there a specific scripture or a specific guest that you're really looking forward to bringing on to your podcast? The show that'll be released soon was fun. It's a specific scripture. It just slipped out of my mind. John 8:7 is what I'll be looking at soon, which is the "Let he without sin cast the first stone." That I think is probably the most misused scripture on social media right now. And I don't dive into politics on my show, so I just kind of leave that there. And then I am trying to arrange, and I'm hoping to be able to do it within the next couple of days. I'm trying to arrange an interview because of my background in music. I'm friends with this guy, the production manager, the guy who actually runs the production for Seventh Time Down. Okay. Nice. And I really want to talk to him about what they've been doing during COVID and how they're getting back out there and those kind of things. I'm going to be interested to see. And then I want to talk kind of like a day in the life of the tour with that group. What's it like when you get up to when you finally go to bed after a show? What happens and what's the behind the scenes type stuff? So I'm really looking forward to arranging that interview and getting that one recorded. So perfect. That was our interrogation segment. The final segment, ask this of every guest. For those that are listening that want to find a way to use their gifts, their talents, their passions as a way to honor God, what would be your wise counsel for somebody that is looking either for their gifts or looking to use their gifts? What would your wise counsel be to them? I mentioned it earlier, and I kind of blew by it, but I always keep a journal. To me, and I never understood the importance of that. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. And I went out and bought this real nice leather, custom leather one, everything like that. Just go to Walmart and buy a 70-cent notebook, and keep a journal. And just for what I did and what I do to this day is every day before I go to bed, I write in it, how was I able to uplift the kingdom of God today, and where did I fall short? And then every week, go back and look at that list. Now, as you see things appear on the how was I able to uplift the kingdom of God, that's going to tell you where your talents are. That's going to tell you the talents that, okay, I'm really seeing a pattern here, and don't rush into it. Take a couple months to really find out what it is that you want to do, because what will happen is if you rush into it and fail, you're going to get discouraged and go, you know what, I'm just going to go back and sit in the back of the line now. If you keep track of it for a couple months and say, man, I keep on seeing this pop up as the top line of this is how I keep uplifting the kingdom of God, then just go do it. I mean, you and I are members of a lot of the same podcasting associations. And what's the thing that we hear all the time? Don't wait till you have the best microphone and the best this and the best that. Just go do it and grow it from there. And I think that's the biggest thing that holds people back from going and getting out into your community, doing discipleship is I have to have the best this, and I have to make sure I have the right this, and I have to make sure this book, and I finish this. No. The only book you need to know is the Bible, and you don't even need to know all of it. All you need to know is be dangerous enough to have that little bit of information that is going to draw somebody in. And one of the other things is don't be afraid to tell somebody you don't know. Because nothing is worse than somebody who's not saved, somebody who's struggling with their faith, somebody who's trying to find out something about the Bible to get the wrong information. So if you say, and I do this all the time in my job, because I have people walking into my office all the time, hey, I read this Bible scripture, or the pastor said this in chapel lesson or something like that. Can you help me out? Can you tell me what this means? And if I don't know, my response is, you know what? I'm not sure what that is, but I'm going to write it down, and I'm going to go find out for you, and then we'll sit down in a couple of days, and we'll talk about it again. And then go do it. Go talk to your pastor. We all have devices. If most of those devices have some type of Bible app on it, and most of those Bible apps, I know the one I use, Olive Tree. I'm not promoting Olive Tree, but the Olive Tree Bible app has hundreds of free resources on that thing.
Yeah.
Go there, That's how you start the dialogue. If you show somebody that you care enough about them to go find out that answer for them, that they're asking you, and you admit that you don't know it, but I'm going to take the effort to find out because that's how much I care about what you're asking me, that goes much, much more than sitting down and beating them over the head with Bible verses.
Exactly. It's the relationship, and that's what Christianity, that's what following Christ is all about, is at the root of it, it's relationship. It's not go therefore and make converts. Go and make disciples.
Exactly.
Relationships, build them. The ultimate multi-level marketing scheme is Jesus, and the rewards are guaranteed.
It's funny you say that, because I was having lunch with my dad on Sunday. I said, we are I can't remember how the conversation come up, but I used that exact thing. I said, what I'm basically doing is Amway.
Yeah.
and he kind of went, are you going to call it the Ponzi scheme scripture? And I'm like, well, basically that's what it is. That's what we want. We want that model. We want to build those groups so the base gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and then they grow, and that's what we want. So
it ain't Amway, it's the way.
There you go. That's about there's a slogan on a shirt right there. I think we just found it right there.
Copyright it, print it.
Yep, that's it.
All right. Well, Patrick Lewis, host of the A Guy in His Bible podcast, available at aguyinhisbible.com. For those of you listening, be sure to check out his podcast, check out his Facebook, The interview with Pastor Matt Plott just came out this week. And I really like the two What's the Next Verse that are posted right now, John 3:16, and, of course, Philippians 4:13, which my favorite interpretation of that is, I can do all things through Christ, through a verse taken out of context.
That's it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. In the Philippians 4:13 one, it's so funny because you see that so much in sports. Mm-hmm. And I just want to bang my head against the wall every time I see it and go, well, somebody please go read the rest of it. Somebody read what's around it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Patrick, thank you so much for joining us. Wish you guys the best. Prayer for continued success and continued victories for the kingdom at the Rescue Mission, as well as for A Guy in His Bible podcast.
Thank you so much for the time, Dave, and look forward to connecting with you more in the groups, bud.